Harriet Lane Johnston, born in 1830, died in 1903. Acclaimed First Lady at the White House from 1857 to 1861, compared to Jacqueline Kennedy. Called by a tribal elder, the mother of the Chippewa Nation. Who got the ball rolling for the National Art Gallery? A favorite of Queen Victoria. Founder of St. Albans School. And established the Harriet Lane Home for Invalid Children at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "Every motion was instinct with life, health, and intelligence. Her head and features were cast in noble mold, and her form, which at rest had something of the massive majesty of a marble pillar, in motion was instinct alike with power and grace." Mary Clemmer Ames wrote, "Grace, light, and majesty seemed to make her atmosphere. Her superb physique gave the impression of intense, harmonious vitality. Her eyes of deep violet shed a constant, steady light, yet they could flash with rebuke, kindle with humor, or soften in tenderness. Her mouth was peculiarly beautiful, capable of expressing infinite humor of absolute sweetness, while her classic head was crowned with masses of golden hair, always worn with perfect simplicity." Jane Buchanan Lane, Harriet's mother, was the sister of the future President James Buchanan. Her father, Elliot Toll Lane, had family in Charlestown, West Virginia nearby. Harriet's mother died when she was 9, and then her father died when she was 11. Harriet declared that she should be adopted by her uncle, James Buchanan, and in about 17 years he would be elected to be the 15th President of the United States, with an as yet unforeseen need, being a bachelor, for a White House hostess or First Lady.
My name is Bob O'Connor. I live in Charlestown, West Virginia. I'm the author of 13 books, and one of those that we're going to talk about today is called Harriet Lane, the original First Lady of Washington. Harriet Lane's father's family lived in Jefferson County, and that's why I got interested in studying Harriet Lane.
Harriet Lane's first cousins who lived in Jefferson County, Rebecca, Sally Eliza Lane Houston Hunter, Marianne Riddle Lane Kennedy, Mary Lane Nicklin, Isaac Newton Carter, and Willoughby Lane Webb. Harriet Lane's uncles who lived in Jefferson County were Willoughby Washington Lane, James Stark Lane, Thomas Chew Lane, and Joseph Eskridge Lane. Harriet Lane certainly did have people in Jefferson County, shown in 8 decades of census records, courthouse, deed books and wills, newspapers, cemetery records, and family history, especially provided by 2 women, cousins once removed from Harriet in Charlestown. Mary Selden Kennedy, born 1847, died 1928, the author of a definitive 2-volume family history for white Virginians, Seldens of Virginia and Allied Families. Catherine W. Riddle, the great-granddaughter of Willoughby Washington Lane, Harriet's uncle, was a major source of family history, starting with parents of all the Lanes who came to this county. Joseph and Mary Lane married in Westmoreland County, Virginia in about 1770. When Joseph died, Mary remarried and moved to Kentucky, and their children, becoming adults, followed her west to Kentucky and closer places like Lancaster, Chambersburg, and Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, Winchester, and Jefferson County, Virginia. Harriet Lane's father settled in Mercersburg and became a successful merchant, marrying and raising children. The ones who came to Jefferson County to live and to have businesses and raise families were Willoughby Washington Lane. Harriet's uncle in 1774 was baptized with George Washington as his godfather. Lane, later as an adult, came down from Pennsylvania, recently married to Rebecca Riddle to settle in Charlestown. His daughter and Harriet's first cousin, Mary Ann Riddle Lane Kennedy, was born in Charlestown in 1799 and later married Andrew Kennedy, an influential lawyer about town. A death-haunted family, Willoughby's own beloved wife, Rebecca, died only in 1803. He started his store with an ever-expanding variety of goods, from groceries to iron bars to clothing and materials to make clothing. He located, as he wrote, almost nearly opposite Captain Hite's Hotel, that records suggest a spot near a 4-lot block Captain Hite owned on the extreme east end of the town, on the south side of Washington Street. Captain George Hite was the current county clerk, serving from 1801 to 1817. He had served as captain of volunteers in the Revolutionary War. According to John C. Allen in his book Uncommon Vernacular, Willoughby had a 6-bay center hall type structure. This, we believe, was Willoughby Lane's 6-bay center hall style home on the south side of East Washington Street in Charlestown, to which subsequent owners have added stucco. He owned a house on this site, straddling 2 of his properties, which when he died he left to his granddaughter, Sarah Houston. On March 20th, 1824, Willoughby Lane paid John and Elizabeth Griggs the astounding amount for the time of $14,489 for a little more than 396 acres of land just outside of Charlestown, called the Cave Farm. Willoughby Washington Lane thus began to accustom himself to the acquired taste of the bitter root of people owning. It was a time in history where Virginia's government sanctioned and utilized the wealth generated by the practice of enslavement, people owning, in which one so able to afford the practice could have others do their work and their will. This, the greatest American tragedy, is that all of society, home and workplace, became inseparable from this institution, needing a war to forcibly extirpate it. 1 in 4 persons, decade after decade, was enslaved in Jefferson County, but generally under less severe conditions than those in the Deep South. The 2 greatest fears were being sold south or having your family broken up by people sellers. This was because agriculture was diverse here and prosperous, and not a cotton monoculture. Getting to freedom was also often just a matter of crossing a river and making your way north on a mountain ridge, or hiding in the canal boat of a sympathizer on the canal and up the canal to Williamsport, Maryland, where the distance from there was very short to Freedom Land, Pennsylvania. This difference between life in Pennsylvania, where enslavement had been outlawed, and in Virginia, drew lines of personal conflict and tension through the Lane family, spanning 3 generations. The Lanes were a family with 1 foot in these 2 different systems and cultures. Willoughby's second daughter and Harriet's cousin Rebecca was born in 1801. Rebecca married, quite young, a doctor from Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, who would soon die, leaving Rebecca a single mother with a child named Sarah Houston. Then, when her second husband, Dr. David Hunter, died in 1834 in his early 30s, Rebecca Lane Hunter would over the years become one of Charlestown's grandes dames. Only 33 years of age in 1834, Rebecca Hunter had 3 daughters, a 2-year-old Mary Elliott, 3-year-old Elizabeth, and 13-year-old Sarah Houston from her previous marriage. She would never remarry. 2 Lane brothers, her father and Uncle Joseph Lane, remembered her generously in their wills. She was given what would be called Hunter's Addition, then called Hunter's Field, and an area suitable for the hanging rituals of John Brown's Raiders in 1859, then building out to today, making it basically 12 residential blocks, the Edge Hill Cemetery, soccer fields, and the residential development beginning and running south from Edge Hill Cemetery. She assumed the role of lady in Charlestown, whose presence legitimized any social event. She lived on the southeast corner of Samuel and Washington Streets. Just 1 door to the east was the home of another of her cousins, Mary Nicklin, daughter of her Uncle George Lane in Frederick County, Virginia. But from Rebecca Hunter's doorstep, going the other direction 100 feet, stood the buzzing hive of the town's social life, the Carter House, where yet another of her cousins and Harriet Lane's, Isaac Newton Carter, was the popular impresario proprietor for some 20 years. He became its proprietor, seeing the opportunity offered by the completion of the Winchester-Potomac Railroad line that brought guests from the region From the B&O train station in Harper's Ferry and on the Winchester-Potomac line, straight to Charlestown, a block from the Carter House. The big times had come. Cousin Isaac, the county's social director just about, because he wrangled at the same time he ran the Carter House, becoming the proprietor of the fabled Shannondale Springs Resort. A few short miles away by carriage from his hotel. Yes, the same place where President James Monroe purportedly conducted business and pleasure with his cabinet, using it as his summer White House. The lavish events there were perhaps one reason Isaac Carter borrowed money, too much to repay his Uncle Joe Eskridge Lane. Shannondale Springs would live forever. Even in this reading now, that memory of that one perfect day. And the queen of the events was named Rebecca, but that's all we can say. No social event would suffice without her presence. One event was written up in a Baltimore newspaper. August 28, 1848 was a day affording interest at this beautiful place in history than any other watering place in Virginia. The morning dawned in autumnal splendor and shed a radiance bright as a halo over the mountaintops through the valley. The mist that rose heavenward to greet the opening day seemed myriad gossamer, fitting on sunlit pinions and dashing the refracted beams to earth in blithesome merriment. All the throng was impatient to behold the brilliant feast to be performed. The sound of many feet and the murmur of voices rose through the vale. The crowd gathered from all points to witness the expected pageant. The rush of vehicles and horses was so great that they had to be left upon the opposite side of the river, and gentlemen and ladies were borne over in the large ferry boat. They walked thence to the hotel. It was truly an exciting and strange sight to see them stretching in hurried and confused steps across the lawn. At 10 o'clock, the knights have in their names. "18 brave and daring champions were registered. They were then ordered to prepare themselves and horses for the tournament. At 11 o'clock, the crowds gathered beneath the umbrageous and majestic elms, where they had a near and far view of the scene. The bugle then sounded, and the knights, all mounted, rode in from the assembled throng under the direction of the herald, dressed in peculiar and picturesque costumes, with their tall lances glittering in the sunbeams. They presented an imposing and brilliant spectacle. The president of the day, one Henry Bettinger, addressed them in such eloquent tones and elevated and inspired sentiments that the dullest bosom was roused to the highest daring, and the true spirit of ancient chivalry was revived. The speech of Mr. Bettinger was most appropriate and beautiful. When he had concluded, the knights repaired to the place of starting. The privilege of selecting the fairest from the lovely array and crowning her the Queen of Beauty was to be the deed of the victor. And there was not one among them would not have scaled a fortress for so rich a boon. Then began the most splendid contention that I've ever witnessed. It is impossible to give a detailed account of it, but the horses, catching the spirit of the rider, flew like the wind, and their flashing eyes and foaming mouths betrayed the high excitement. Mr. K, the victor, was then requested to name the first maid of honor, and selected one of the belles of Jefferson County. After the selection, the company repaired to the hotel, where a most sumptuous feast was spread there, with the flow of champagne and the exchange of toasts consuming the afternoon. Everyone then retired to their rooms to prepare for the fancy ball. At about 8:30 o'clock, the spacious ballroom was thronged with spectators awaiting entrance of the Queen. At the sound of music, the folding doors at the upper end of the room were suddenly opened, and the Queen and her champion, richly dressed in fancy costumes, appeared, followed by the knight and maids of honor and a long train of attendants, all fancifully attired. They proceeded to the far end of the room. Then the Queen and her champion and 3 knights and maids of honor took hands, formed and danced a cotillion. I have been to many balls and have seen much in this way, but have never seen one so bright and beautiful as this. The many characters represented every nation. A few, however, were very conspicuous. Mr. Lewis Washington, as the English hunter of the 15th century, so superbly he filled the character to very life. and Mr. John Pendleton Kennedy, in the court dress of Louis XIV, looked remarkably striking and handsome.
When the swallows homeward fly, when the roses scattered lie, when from neither hill nor dale chants the silvery nightingale, in these words my bleeding heart would to thee its grief impart. When I thus thy image lose, can I, oh can I e'er know repose? Can I, oh can I e'er know repose?
Shannondale Springs' other story. What lies beneath? While under the cover of night, Lawson Goins, the resort's ferry boatman, could bring across the Shenandoah trunks containing cargo, but really people. The resort, known for its Whig Party inclinations and a distaste for people owning, allowed these people to be taken to the nearby Bushy Ridge community of freed African Americans. Bushy Ridge had two families, the Thomas Goins and Jackson Newman households, and together by 1859 they owned 39 acres. County historian Dr. William Theriot, who wrote the nomination to place the springs on the National Register, wrote that the culture and management of the Shannondale Springs represented a witting ally to the Underground Railroad. The Bushy Ridge community would be the start of the long, harrowing journey of hastening northward only on the moonless nights, while hiding silent and still by day. Life-saving support from sympathizers all along the way, that for some, like George Johnston of Harper's Ferry, went all the way to Chatham, Ontario, was held together only by furtive glances, coded passwords, and an improbable cadence of knuckles rapping on your front door. Uncle Joe Eskridge Lane, one of the 4 brothers and savvy merchants to come from Pennsylvania, implied in his will the high-flying hospitality of his cousin and hotelier, Isaac Carter. I give and bequeath to my nephew I.N. Carter all the indebtedness which he may owe to me at my death, either by bond note or bank note. 5 years later, Isaac posted in the newspaper, "Having disposed of my hotel property, I am now engaged in settling up my business preparatory to leaving town." Major holdings of 3 cousins and their uncle in Charlestown in the 1850s. Uncle Joe lived here on one of the 4 lots making up a block in Charlestown he owned, among other properties there. He also instructed the executors of his will, one of whom was his niece Rebecca Lane Hunter, in the following: "To my servants, Anne Virginia Fraser, who was born 6 March 1828, Catherine Jane Fraser, who was born 15 September 1831, and Eveline Lear Fraser, who was born 5 June 1835, I give each their freedom to them and their children forever. And I give, bequeath to the above named the interest arising from the sum of $5,000, which $5,000 shall be invested in the Bank of the Valley in Virginia, said interest of dividends, to be drawn by them after they attain the ages of 21 years after my death. It is my will that my executors shall retain the sum of $1,500 to be expended by them on the purchase of a house and lot for each of the above named Anne Virginia, Catherine Jane, and Eveline Lear Fraser, and that the above request be provided before any other. We investigate, and did the Frasers get the freedom, the money, and the houses and lots Uncle Joe willed to them? Manumission or freedom papers have to be filed in the courthouse to make it binding. No freed African American women with the surname of Fraser and the birth years of 1828, 1831, and 1835 were found in the 1860 census records for Virginia, Maryland, Ohio, or Pennsylvania. No Frasers who were African American women appear in the county deed records, will records, marriage or death records. Courthouse will books indicate a receipt from Rebecca Hunter as executrix and its location in the records, but it does not appear at that location. But a person fitting the description and age of Evelina Fraser appears in the 1880 census, living in Spotsylvania, Virginia, a widow with 3 children. People owning was the widening chasm, even among close Lane family members, and it continued to widen. Uncle Joe died in 1852 and was buried in the nearby Zion Episcopal churchyard. The Shepherdstown Lanes, 3 uncles and a rascal of a cousin. Just as Uncle Joe gave his cousin, Isaac Carter, money for his Carter house in Shannondale Springs, Gambits, He also willed $5,000 to another cousin in Shepherdstown named Willoughby Lane Webb, hoping to carry on their legacy of success. The aging brothers, Willoughby Washington, Joseph, and in Shepherdstown, Thomas, James, and also John, who incidentally invested in Shepherdstown but never moved here from Pennsylvania, they too gave their cousin, this Willoughby Lane Webb, lots of cash, property, and opportunity, which gave him everything except good judgment. Isaac Carter's success was real, long-term, and sometimes spectacular. But Willoughby's trajectory was straight up to the skies, then straight down in just 2 years. Implausible but true, Webb set up a woolen factory at the corner of Princess and High Streets, where the Blue Moon Cafe is today, and back in 1850, just 200 yards from an established competitor called White and Henkel, who were also making and selling the same flannels and linseys Willoughby Webb planned to make too. Willoughby Webb set up a shop twice the size and failed doubly hard. In the U.S. Census report of Virginia's manufacturing product for 1850, Willoughby reported $33,000 in capital invested in real and personal estate in the business, powered by water and steam, with 40 male and 20 female employees, with an average monthly cost for both of about $1,500. So trusted was this rising star that when he bought a lot for the factory, some of the town's leading denizens, such as Alexander Butler, believed him, to the tune of $20,000, according to Butler's daughter, Helen Butler Pendleton. She later wrote in the Shepherdstown Register issue of December 21, 1933. In 1852, a business calamity overtook Alexander Butler in the failure of Willoughby L. Webb, a merchant of Shepherdstown, upon whose notes he had placed his name because of his friendship for Mr. Webb. My father was called upon to pay nearly $20,000, a large part of it his wife's money, her father having left her considerable property. It took Willoughby Webb just 2 years to go bust, advertising a fire sale to make up $15,000 in immediate losses, offering for sale the structure, the lot, along with a 20-horsepower steam engine with boilers, a set of fulling stocks, 2 wood breakers, 2 finishing condensers, a wool picker, 2 spinning jacks with 198 spindles each, a doubler and a twister, 20 spindles, 2 yarn reels, 1 tuning lathe, 2 spooling machines, 2 bobbin machines, 1 broad power loom, 19 hand looms, lathes, and a harness, and more. He left the county under a cloud of suspicion and recrimination, only to return from Washington, D.C. in 1889, barely noticed, in a wooden box that was buried in Zion Episcopal Churchyard in Charlestown. The Lanes, Uncles James S., John N., Joseph E., Willoughby Washington, and their cousin, Willoughby Lane Webb, owned these properties in Shepherdstown in the first half of the 19th century, including other farms in Jefferson County, 30 acres, 181 acres, 65 acres, 19 acres, 113 acres, 48 acres, 46.5 acres, and 7 acres, excluding the farms of Rebecca Hunter and Mary Ann Kennedy in Charlestown, and all Lane properties in Berkeley County. December 2nd, 1859. John Brown is hanged and on gallows planted in Rebecca Hunter's farm field. 7 raiders visited Miss Hunter's gallows 3 times through March 1860. They changed the course of history and the character of the nation forever. Charlestown, Virginia, 2nd December 1859. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done. And David Hunter Strother, the famous writer-illustrator for Harper's Monthly, who sketched the event, would very soon not only become a fiery uniformed officer in the United States Army, but also Rebecca's son-in-law. War was fast coming to the Hunter Lane family. And the war would, it first appeared, start right in Jefferson County, where the strategic Baltimore and Ohio Railroad dipped briefly into Virginia that had just acted to join a foreign country. April 18, 1861. On that fateful night, after Virginia's conditioned vote to secede from the United States, many local militiamen were already en route to Harper's Ferry to take control of the federal arsenal, basing their action on a word-of-mouth understanding that their action was legal and officially sanctioned. The acting militia commander, a 31-year-old professionally trained officer from Summit Point named James Allen, was confronted and cautioned by a locally born but ardent Unionist, David Hunter Strother. As the local militia moved towards Harper's Ferry at the urgings of Turner Ashby on the night of April 18th, Strother, a lifelong friend of those present, intervened, arguing that no formal written order had been produced to authorize the militias to move on the federal arsenal in the lower town and capture its estimated 16,000 weapons and weapons-making equipment. Just as Colonel Allen was taking Strother's point to heart and ordered his militia only so far east as Halltown pending the substantiation of his orders, when there erupted from the lower town, out of their line of sight, flashes and detonations. Several times repeated, then a steadier flame was seen rising from two distinct points silent and rapidly increasing in volume until each rock and tree on the Loudoun and Maryland Heights were distinctly visible. And now, over clouded sky was ruddy with a sinister glare. This occurred, I think, between 9 and 10 o'clock. Some thought they heard artillery, but the more skillful presently guessed the truth and concluded that the officer in command had set fire to the arsenals and abandoned the town. With the ashes of the arsenal cooling, Strother perceived in the light of the next day the enormity of the events. I must confess that I felt this morning like a man wandering in a maze. So it seemed that the sudden gust of emotion, excited by the lowering of our starry flag, had swept away the mists of speculation and revealed in its depth and breadth the abyss of degradation opened by secession. Yesterday, I was a citizen of the great American Republic. My country spanned a continent. Her northern border neared the frigid zone, while her southern limit touched the tropics. Her eastern and western shores were washed by the two great oceans of the globe. Her commerce covering the most remote seas, her flag honored in every land. The strongest nation acknowledged her power, and the most enlightened honored her attainments in art, science, and literature. Her political system, the cherished ideal towards whose realization the noblest aspirations and efforts of mankind have been directed for ages. The great experiment which the pure and wise of all nations are watching with trembling solicitude and imperishable hope. It was something to belong to such a nationality. This was yesterday. Today, what am I? A citizen of Virginia. Virginia, a petty commonwealth with scarcely 1 million white inhabitants. What could she ever hope to be but a worthless fragment of the broken vase, a fallen and splintered column of the once glorious temple? But I will not dwell longer on the humiliating contrast. Come, harness up the buggy and let us go out of this, or I shall suffocate.
Andrew Hunter, who was Rebecca Hunter's brother-in-law by her second marriage to his brother David, lived a short walk from Rebecca's home on Washington Street at his imposing structure of a home called Hunter's Hill. He was known as the aggressive lawyer who prosecuted John Brown and an early leader in Virginia's secession from the Union. He was also a first cousin of the Union Major General David Hunter. This David Hunter, in better times, gave Andrew a ring with an affectionate engraved sentiment. This David Hunter was at West Point with Rebecca Hunter's deceased second husband, Andrew's brother. At West Point, they called the shorter Major General Hunter Little David, and Andrew's brother, Big David. The bitter gall of war, having been drunk aplenty in the years ahead, twisted the family affections. In June 1864, Major General Hunter led his 20,000-man force into Virginia with David Hunter Strother, yet another cousin, as his chief of staff. David Hunter Strother, a cousin to his wife, Mary Elliott, who was the daughter to Rebecca and the late David Hunter, was with General David Hunter on June 12, 1864, when they burned down the Virginia Military Institute. In Lexington, Virginia, Strother wrote in his diary, June 12th, Sunday, the general asked my opinion in regard to the Institute. I told him I looked upon it as a most dangerous establishment where treason was systematically taught, for the express purpose of educating the youth of the country into such opinions as would render them efficient tools wherewith to overthrow the government of the country when the hour and opportunity arrived. The Federals had those 20,000 men and 36 guns. The order was given to fire the building and all the houses and outbuildings. As the order was executed, the plunderers came running out, their arms full of spoils. The burning of the Institute made a grand picture. A vast volume of black smoke rolled above the flames and covered half the horizon. Upon learning that Virginia's former governor, John Letcher, issued what Strother called a foolish and abusive order for the citizenry to rally against General Hunter's actions, General Hunter ordered a Captain Berry to burn Letcher's house that was nearby, allowing his family 10 minutes to get out of the house. The order was executed without delay. I walked to an opposite hill to view the scene, which was grand, although the burning went on very slowly. July 1864, Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Another home will be burned by the Hunters in Charlestown. To Hunter's Hill. Now General David Hunter ordered the burning of his cousin Andrew Hunter's palatial home in Charlestown, allowing the family to take out only those things which they could carry. Captain Martindale led the contingent. Andrew Hunter was arrested and later released. The rising flames consumed oil paintings, a grand piano, and by morning was a smoldering shell of lost memories. David Hunter Strother wrote the next day on July 19th. The house of Andrew Hunter was burned yesterday by Martindale. I am sorry to see this warfare begun and would be glad to stop it. But I don't pity the individuals at all. A war of mutual devastation will depopulate the border counties, which contain all my kindred on both sides of the question. I would fain save some of them, but fear that all will go under alike in the end. Shortly thereafter, an order was issued by the commander of the Union forces to General Philip H. Sheridan, 26 August 1864. Give the enemy no rest, and if it is possible, to follow the Virginia Central Railroad. Follow that far. Do all the damage to railroads and crops you can. Carry off stock of all descriptions and Negroes so as to prevent further planting. If the war is to last another year, we want the Shenandoah Valley to remain a barren waste. When hostilities ended in 1865, the Lane-Hunter family remained hostile. All of them would die in their turn on the wheel of life. David Hunter Strother and his wife Mary's remains were buried side by side in Martinsburg at the Green Hill Cemetery, not in the Zion churchyard in Charlestown, where all the Lanes and Hunters placed their earthly remains. April 1st, 1895, Mrs. Rebecca Hunter, widow of the late Dr. David Hunter, died suddenly Monday night about 12 o'clock at her residence in Charlestown. She was unusually bright and cheerful, and well up to the hour of retiring, when she complained of weakness and sank rapidly until death came. She is thought to have been the oldest woman in the county. She was highly cultured and a woman of remarkable energy and physical vigor, and enjoyed good health all her life. She owned fine property in Charlestown and a large country estate. Her family consisted of 3 daughters, the third of whom is Mrs. Mary E. Strother, the widow of General David H. Strother, who is known in literature as Port Crayon. Those days were over at last.
My God, my Father, while I stray far from my home on life's rough way, oh, teach me from my heart to say, Thy will be done. Though dark my path and sad my lot, let me be still and murmur not, but breathe the prayer divinely taught. Thy will be done. Renew my will from day to day, blend it with thine and take away all that now makes it hard to say, Thy will be done. Let but my fainting heart be blessed with thy sweet spirit for its guest. My God, to thee I leave the rest. Thy will be done. Though thou hast called me to resign what most I prized, it ne'er was mine. I have but yielded what was thine. Thy will be done. Renew my will from day to day, blend it with thine and take away all that now makes it hard to say, Thy will be done. Then when on earth I breathe no more, the prayer oft mixed with tears before, I'll sing upon a happier shore.